How's it going, folks? Janek Gwizdala here. It's the Janek Gwizdala podcast. I'm in Oakland, California. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see a vastly different backdrop from what you are perhaps used to seeing. I'm in the hotel. Bought a bunch of gear with me as I'm shooting some interviews while I'm out here on tour. And none of those have cropped up in time to release for today's episode. So here I am solo after the gig in the hotel room, kind of a little test of the road equipment here. And wow, we're 5 shows into the West Coast tour, and it's been great to play 5 in a row. First of all, that's always an amazing feeling. Well, let's see, it's not always an amazing feeling. Actually, a couple of tours popped into my head where I'm like, holy shit, we're 5 nights in and it doesn't feel good. So, okay, it's not always an amazing feeling. When you're playing with these guys, when you're playing with Steve Smith, Manuel Valera in the incarnation of the 40th anniversary incarnation of Vital Information, it's really fun. My daughter got sick right before I left, so I picked that up, which is unfortunate, and the cough is back. But yeah, just reporting in really, and while all this stuff is fresh in my mind, the instant reminder that is being back on the road and playing very challenging music really every night. We're 5 nights in a row tonight. We just played Yoshi's here in Jack London Square in Oakland, and we'll be in Kumboa probably the same day this podcast is going out, and that will be 6 in a row before we get a night off. So we definitely have the set kind of dialed in, but at the same time it's very interesting, some of the dynamics within the show, and some of the differences between how each of these tunes gets played every night. I'm going to get into all of that, and even a little bit of a nerdy harmony question that came up on my video, 3 exercises every bass player should try. It's a recent thing on the channel. Yeah, so we'll get to all of that. First of all, I got to remind people, folks, maybe you don't know about this yet, the pre-sale is on for the new album. We are heading to Argentina. We're heading to Buenos Aires to record the new album with the trio, with Tom Corley, with Nico Vicaro. I'm writing choral music for voices. Like, it's starting to get kind of epic. I've talked about it a little bit over the past couple of months, but things are really starting to come into focus. Things about working with my old designer who did a lot of album covers like Mystery to Me and 55 Bar, Space in Between, Motion Picture, It Only Happens Once. Like, Jonas has done a ton of them, so I reached out to him to see if he would be interested in coming down and kind of being, director of photography and really taking care of things from a design aspect. So it's on all fronts, it's getting kind of epic. Plus, shows are starting to come together. I wish I could announce them. We're still a little bit away from being able to announce the shows in South America, but yeah, that is all happening, and the pre-sale for the album is on. That's kind of what is helping facilitate a lot of this stuff. That is linked in the show notes of this episode or directly below the video if you're watching this episode of the podcast on YouTube. And basically it's super exciting. First of all, just planning all this stuff and I'm not deep into the writing yet because it's still not until August, and as I said in the opening of this episode, I'm out on the road right now playing completely different music and having to concentrate on that. So I'm not as deep into the writing process as I'm going to be, obviously. It's more sort of logistics and making sure I can move everyone around the world and get them in the right place at the right time, and make sure everyone kind of shows up and is prepared as best they can and as best I can be. So it's really logistics now, and obviously doing the pre-sale and getting all of this stuff moving, just as we did for One Way Out last year, which, as I have talked a little bit about before, was a great success from that standpoint. A lot of people got involved. So I'm definitely hoping there are people out there who are interested in what's happening next and the new project and brand new music and a kind of a bit of a different approach, even though it's the same trio. We are going to be doing some, much more kind of compositional and melodic and harmonic exploration here, and creating quite at least how I hear it right now. See, this will change over time, but the way I hear it right now, it's quite a large sound, and it's quite different in terms of having the trio augmented by by voices and, quite lush harmony, and yeah, kind of treating the voices in a lot of different ways. Quite hard to explain, actually. I think I'm actually going to need to explain it to myself and write it down and solidify the concept a little more over the coming weeks before I can successfully explain it to anyone else. But anyway, that's what's happening. It's all sort of kicking off, and that's it. The first week of August, the album will be recorded and will be out, I think we're saying the beginning of November, in time for the European tour. We'll be in Europe for a couple of weeks playing some shows. I know we're going to be 2 nights in London, one in Nottingham, of all places. Haven't played there in a really long time. Actually, I really don't remember when the last time I played Nottingham was. It's been at least 15 years. And then some stuff, maybe Poland, Romania, I think France is on the hit list. Just a bunch of different places around Europe. We're going to pack it all in for a couple of weeks. So, man, really wish I could get rid of this cough. Sorry about that. But yeah, it's all kind of kicking off, and the chaos is happening on multiple levels. So let's get to what's happening right now this week. I really want to report in on the gigs with Steve and with Vital Information. It's really, it's a band I used to listen to when I was a kid, and it's something that was a big influence for me, especially as we close the show with this tune, The Perfect Date, which is from an album, maybe the first record, definitely over 30 years old, because it's the 40th anniversary. We're doing a couple of, only 2 old things, actually, that Manuel rearranged, piano player. And yeah, we get to kind of revisit that, and it really triggers those memories from when I was a kid, like checking out Fusion, like that sound. Wow. I don't know if I'm going to make it through a whole episode. Holy cow. Maybe I was a little too optimistic. Let's see. Got plenty of liquid here too. Yeah, I was listening to Fusion, listening to those guys, Steve Smith and Frank Gambale and Jeff Andrews and Tom Coster and all of the cats who played in Vital Information. And of course, Steps Ahead that I've talked about before, and the Brecker Brothers, and that kind of era of 70s, 80s, 90s fusion that was very influential to me, when I was younger. And now to be playing that music, obviously a couple of those old things that Manuel's rearranged, which is super fun. It's kind of his take and our ensemble take on those tunes. And just the evolution of Steve's sound and the sound of the band, and kind of what Vital Information as a band is doing now compared to what it was doing when it started 40 years ago. It's really nice to be a tiny part of that history, the most current part of that history right now, obviously, and find my place in that. And that's sort of something that's evolving. It's been evolving because we played some shows last year, and I've played with Steve on and off for many years. And I've even played officially a Vital Information show as early as 2000. But then that was sort of short-lived because of the pandemic. But since we've been able to play and tour and stuff, we've done some stuff in New York. We played at Birdland. We played on the East Coast a little bit. And of course, we made this new album, which is coming out in May, called Time Flies. And so to be a part of that and sort of find my spot in the band, and it's really easy, I think, to get married to or to get nostalgic about a thing you heard like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, something you were really like, oh, this is the best shit ever. In that moment, maybe you're a teenager. For me, it was when I was a teenager and was listening to Vital Information and all those fusion bands. And to be able to let that go and be present enough for that highly influential sound from back then not to affect, it's impossible for it to not affect what I'm doing now at all, but for as much as I possibly can to have it not affect the way I approach the music now. And Steve's sound has changed, and just the drum sound has changed, the cymbal sound has changed. There was, I think the whole sound has changed, actually. So to find my spot in that really interesting part of the touring process. It's not all just like waking up early and traveling a long way and playing a show and getting very little sleep and doing all those sort of stereotypical things that happen on the road. There's really a nice sort of research element to it, and development element to it in real time on the road, which is really cool. It's almost like being a band leader or co-band leader or something. Obviously, I'm not. It's not my band. It's Steve's band for sure. But he is so kind with his sort of open-mindedness and an open approach to the music that I think we all get what feels like a very even amount of input into the music, and without any ego as well. You know, if Steve says something to me, I'm going to listen to it. If Manuel says something to Steve is going to listen. It's like really sort of even keeled and very grown up, very adult of everyone, the way it works. There's no like bickering or arguing. We're all sort of open to suggestions. And it's interesting that, we're playing kind of the same set. We're basically playing most of the new album, which is really nice to have done, to have been in the studio, recorded that, and then be able to go out and really play all the music. Like there's no filler tracks or studio only things that we aren't able to play live without backing tracks or sequence or something. We can actually play all the stuff live that we did in the studio. Even though there was layering and stuff, we found a way to play a bunch of stuff as a trio, very live, which is really cool. It's nice to be able to play basically the full album. And yeah, to figure that out live, I've actually totally lost my thread because I'm thinking in 5 different places right now. But to figure all that out in real time is really, really fun. And I can't think of a project other than my own most recently last year, where we did One Way Out and then we did a very short tour of only 5 dates in Europe. That was a similar experience, like figuring out how we're going to take that music from the studio. And that was very improvised, of course. One Way Out was almost all improvised. How we're going to do that live and explore that every night. Yeah, and Steve just lets us do our thing. And it's kind of interesting. Like one of the arrangements, Manuel has this great arrangement of What Is This Thing Called Love that we recorded, the Cole Porter tune that we recorded on the album, with this section in 7 and then really nice unison lines with the left hand of the piano and the bass, and live there's a big drum solo at the end, and it's been really interesting, and just the way we're approaching the tunes, like there's it's not like it's completely rigid and set in stone. Like there's movement there, which is really nice. It could be so easy. In fact, I've worked with other people who shall remain nameless. I've worked with other people that I love to work with, actually. I've worked with other people from that era, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, obviously. I've worked with a lot of guitar players. I mean, just a lot of people that play fusion. I've gotten to work with a lot of my heroes. And quite often that's not the case. Like you don't get that input. You don't get that sort of decision about what tune is going where in the set. It's very much, okay, this is the way I want it. This is the way we're going to play it. Great. Which has its place as well, of course. I would say Mike Stern is someone maybe a little bit like that. We play like he likes to build. I think he's very good at building a show. Stern, I think he has great shape to the set when he builds it. So it does end up staying, kind of thematically speaking, it ends up staying quite similar each time we play with Mike Stern. But with Steve, it's kind of really different in the way we're able to approach it. And with Manuel's arrangement of this tune, with this Cole Porter song, What Is This Thing Called Love, we've been doing it different ways. Sometimes Steve will count it off and we'll go right on the vamp in 7. Sometimes Manuel will play kind of loose out front. Sometimes he'll play totally free. Sometimes he'll play on the form. And more recently, the last few nights, he's been playing not just melody, but a lot of melody, a lot of linear ideas with some maybe counterpoint bass lines. Man, this is probably not going to last too much longer. Sorry, cats. He's been playing a lot of this linear language, vocabulary out front to set the tune up. And it's been interesting with the tempos. Like sometimes it has been definitely on the front edge of being maybe a little too fast. And in order for the unison lines in the arrangement to work, and in order for us to present the music at its most optimal, I think it's a bit of a challenge when it gets too fast. And a couple of nights out of the last 5, it has been a little quick, but it's not an issue. Yeah, we feel it in the minute, we feel it in the moment. We're like, oh shit, that's a little bit quick. And then like tonight, it was fast. Last night was like sort of felt perfect. And then tonight was a little bit fast on that tune. And Steve just said, we came off the stage and I think that was the last tune we played before the encore. So we're all kind of backstage while the audience was applauding. And Steve just said, "Oh man, that's too fast for me." And Mama was like, "Oh, really? Okay." Like, hadn't even noticed. He was just, in the moment. And Steve's like, "Yeah, kind of feel like I don't, play my best like at that particular tempo on that tune." And Mama was like, "Okay, fine, no problem." So now the decision was made for Steve to give the tempo that he's most comfortable at before we play, and there's no ego involved, which is great. It's just a simple bit of direction, and somebody had an issue with this and they fixed it immediately, and nobody got butthurt over it, and on we go, like on we maneuver with the rest of the tour. So yeah, that's kind of the scouting report on what's been going on so far. Catalina's was fun, playing not only we played 5 nights in a row, but we played 3 nights at the same club. So not only is that cool, anyone who does that ever, you leave your stuff there and you just show up, sit down and play, that's really nice. But it was also in Los Angeles, so that was home for me. So I got to sleep in my own bed, which is super rare in the middle of a tour, to suddenly be home but still playing every night on the tour, and only have to be traveling 25 minutes to the gig and back, and then be able to wake up and be around the kiddo. So that was a really nice bonus of being on the West Coast. And I spoke to Chelsea on the phone, and we realized that in all the time we've been together, it's over 6 years now, I've never done like just a West Coast tour. I've never done a tour where I was gone but on the same time zone as the family back home. So it's actually kind of a bunch of things going on this week, which is super nice. And we started out in Utah, so I did have to fly out there, but then we came back for the next 3 shows in LA, and now we're just up in Northern California. So it's been nice to not be that far from home, and to do the FaceTime with the kiddo at the right time. So it's very nice. I want to get to this sort of nerdy question that cropped up on the last video I posted on YouTube, and it's a harmony thing. And I think maybe this is sort of a common misconception about what I was talking about. Now, I don't have my bass in the hotel room. I'm not going to be able to play this to you, but you can go back and watch that. It's called 3 Exercises Every Bass Player Should Try. I'm not sure why the person commenting is talking about the 4th exercise, because I'm pretty sure there are only 3. Maybe I put 5 and I mistitled it. Anyway, you will find it on the YouTube channel. These are some sort of basic exercises that have been in my routine for a long time that I think are super useful. And I explain why in the video, of course. But I think an often misunderstood concept when using diminished vocabulary but over a dominant chord to go to the 1 chord. So you've got a 5-to-1 cadence. I really wish I had a piano here. Wouldn't that be awesome? Sadly, I'm not Paul McCartney, and I can't demand there be a piano in every hotel room. I'll make do with some liquid to try and hold this cough at bay. In fact, I'm not going to waste my time putting the top on that bottle. So the diminished thing, using diminished language over a dominant chord to head to the 1. The question came to say that I think my confusion boils down to this. Many of the notes in the G sharp diminished scale, if that's what it is, that's what they're asking, aren't contained within the major scale. Furthermore, the G sharp isn't the 5th scale degree in C major, so I'm wondering how/why this works. Okay, so I'm going to explain all that and give you the context and all of that. If you're this person listening, who is this? Oh my God. I can't even, Fanticide. I don't know. This is quite the handle. I sort of wish people would just use their names on YouTube. It'd make it so much easier to credit you with the question if I do that. So maybe if you're starting a YouTube channel, that might be worth thinking about. Just use your name. So much easier to read most of the time. So if you hear the thing, like if you've watched my video and you heard me play the exercise and you hear that it works, like you do, if you're sitting there like, okay, that sounds like it makes sense. If it sounds like it makes sense, my first suggestion to you is to just do it. Don't think about it, just do it. Put it in your muscle memory with the feeling and the feedback to yourself that it makes sense. That to your ear, which is the most important thing through all of this, that to your ear it makes sense, and you can feel where the tension is, you can feel where the dominant chord is, and you can feel where the resolution is when it goes to the 1. Those are the most important elements of it. It's not like what the scale degree is and the name of this and the bullshit of that. No, the more you're thinking about it being diminished or G sharp not being in the major scale, and here we go. I should explain the context. So the context is you're in C major. Your dominant chord is G7. So if you're sitting there with your bass right now, just play C major, chord, triad, or even the scale. Play a G7 chord, the root, the third, and the flat 7th. So G, B, and F natural. And then go back to the C major triad. It's just 1, 5, 1. It's a perfect cadence, 5 going to 1. Now, I'm using diminished over the dominant chord. So you can start a diminished arpeggio. There are only 4 notes in it. You can just start that on either the flat 9, the major 3rd, the 5th, or the flat 7th. I'm without the instrument, and I'm just like talking about it. I have to actually visualize that. See, this is the thing. I know that it works. I hear that it works. It's actually way more work to think about what all the notes are. But yeah, so flat 9, major 3rd, natural 5, and flat 7. Those are the 4 possible notes in that a diminished arpeggio that you can use over that, over a dominant chord. In this case, it's G. So G is the dominant chord. Now they've said in the question in the question on YouTube, they've said G sharp, but actually in this context, a half step up from G is actually A flat in this context because it's a flat 9. It's not a sharp 1, it's a flat 9. So it would actually be A flat that this person is asking about. And yes, G7, the flat 9 is A flat. So you can start on the A flat, you can start on the major 3rd, which is B, you can start on the 5th, which is D, and you can start on the flat 7, which is F natural. All of those notes work over that dominant chord, and they all resolve into the 1 chord. Just because they're not in the natural major scale of the key center, which is C in this case, doesn't mean to say they don't work. And of course they do. And when you listen to the video, you listen to the music in the video, you hear, I can absolutely hear a perfect cadence. I can hear 5 going to 1. It's as simple as that. It's one of the, there are a bunch of clinicians that do this, and they'll sing something and they'll say, okay, what's the next note? And without fail, they're trying to get the audience to sing from 5 to 1. The audience will always go home. They'll always go naturally where their ear is going and sing the 1. I've seen that so many times in different masterclasses and clinics because it's the natural inclination, at least in Western music and people who've listened to the radio, or, maybe they're more advanced and they're music students, or perhaps you're into jazz like I am. It's a very, very natural place to go is from 5 to 1. So if you want to understand it, theoretically, and if you want to talk about it, that's really the only time I think that you need to know why and what and how from a theoretical standpoint. Otherwise, I'd really recommend you just stay away from that initially, at least, and just know how it feels. Understand that, okay, so I've got these 4 starting, boil it down to whatever gets your foot in the door. For me, it's easy to explain it by, hey, there are these 4 starting points to get this very specific sound on a dominant chord. And what does it do? It gets you these tensions. A flat 9, obviously major 3rd is in the chord, natural 5th is in the chord, and flat 7, as it's a dominant chord, is in the chord. So what you're getting is this one kind of flavor, which is the flat 9. One kind of more outside note. It's actually the only note that isn't, as this person was asking, in the natural major scale of the key center. So it's, again, really important just to listen and do it, play it, do it, feel it happen. It's one thing listening to me do it or whoever you hear doing it. It's quite another to experience it yourself. I think that's the moment where you're like, it doesn't matter what it's called. You can get to that later. If you really feel compelled to learn the theory and do the analysis, you can absolutely get to that later. And it's just as easy as learning how to say, bonjour, comment ça va in French. Hello, how are you? It's literally as easy as learning what that is, and you know, why bonjour is hello, and why comment ça va is how are you. It's literally as easy as learning the rudimentary elements of another language. But you don't learn another language by, you know, if you wanted to say hello, how are you in French, you wouldn't learn how to spell the words first before you spoke them. I'm pretty certain that I might be able to go 100% positive feedback on this one for anyone listening that speaks a second language, for instance. I'm pretty sure that the first bits and pieces that you learn of that language were not, you didn't take a spelling lesson. You heard someone say those words, or even in a class, you were taught as an oral tradition. You know, your teacher will have, either if you learn it in a class, your teacher will have just been speaking to you in that language and repeating bonjour. You walk in the classroom, bonjour, and, you know, maybe your name's Michel. So bonjour, Michel, and you hear that word associated with your name, just as you hear the flat nine associated with the dominant chord. And suddenly you're like, oh, I know the dominant chord. What's this bonjour bullshit, a half step up? Oh, it's A flat. Okay, cool. Well, whatever. I don't need to know that it's A flat. I just need to know that, like, bonjour, Michel means hello, Michel. And A flat on a G7 chord means flat nine, and it gives you this specific sound. And I think, unlike language, hey, this is a really unresearched, you know, idea off the top of my head. But I'm pretty, unlike language, there are like way less options with music. Like English alphabet, 26 letters, kind of Western chromatic scale, only 12 notes, right? So even that, you're like, your basic palette of note names is already, you know, less than half than the letters you have in the alphabet. And then your tensions are flat 9, sharp 9, you know, sharp 11, or flat 5, sharp 5. They're just a finite number of tensions on these chords. So it's, even if you want to learn all the theory, it's really not that far away, because there just aren't that many options. Even when you get into like major 7 sharp 9 or major 7 flat 9, it's still, conceptually, it's the same tensions. You're just changing the quality of the chord. You know, tensions don't always have to happen on a dominant chord. It's sort of a little bit rare to have like a minor 7 flat 9, for instance, but it's not like it's not a sound. Just have to really be in the mood, I guess, with a chord like that. But basically what I'm saying is, do it first. But listen, of course. Listen, watch, learn, and then do it. Really important just to do it and feel what that, well, feel what that sounds like. That sounds like such a bad sentence in the English language, but there is a certain amount of truth to that. I think there's a huge amount of feeling that goes into certain sounds, and you feel a certain way when you play them, you feel a certain way when you hear them. And for me, associating those sounds with certain feelings has been really key in terms of being able to do them naturally. Being able to play over any chord, over any harmony, through any harmony, just as naturally as I'm talking to you right now, as I'm looking at the camera and I'm talking into the microphone. And it's like a stream of consciousness. I had no idea I was going to talk about this 30 minutes ago, but here I am. I have a moderately decent command of the English language. I know a little bit about harmony, and here I am, just the words are flowing out. I'm not thinking about how they're spelled. I'm not thinking about how they would be punctuated, how the sentences would be punctuated if they were written down. It's all completely natural. And I think that's what gets a little bit lost when it comes to music and when it comes to improvisation. That's not to say that knowing the harmony is not important from a theoretical standpoint. As much as I talk about doing it and feeling it first, I think there are many, many valid reasons for knowing what's going on from a technical standpoint. Faster access to certain things, especially when in conversation, for instance, rehearsals. You want to tell a piano player it's a specific voicing. It's not just C minor, but it's C Aeolian. Ooh, you know, how do you want that voice? Well, I want this note and that note and that note. And you can tell them a whole set of tensions. And, oh, do you want to try it? Oh, well, I really like that upper structure. Try it. And suddenly you've explained this much wider palette of colors, you know, maybe more than a simple chord symbol can describe. And that is only so you don't have to walk over there and play the voicing for them yourself. It's so you can be understood quickly and make the best use of everyone's time. So there are many reasons to know the theory, but I would hate to think that you got hung up on being able to, on not being able to play your instrument because you were thinking about it too much, and because you feel like you don't understand why, as the person said, G sharp, it's actually A flat. If you're spelling it correctly, you have no idea why A flat works on that G7 chord when A flat is not in the major scale of the key, your destination key. So, yeah, get as many. I always talk about the links in the chain, and how if there are, that maybe there should only be two links to me. There's the musical idea is one link, and then the performance is the other, and they're like linked tight together like that. Now, you start putting more links in that chain, and those two essential elements get farther and farther apart, and you have this whole other set of processes. I never know that word. But you have there's a whole bunch of other things to go through and think about that get in the way of the musical idea being attached to the performance. And as soon as you separate those two, your performance gets this. You can hear that. I can hear when somebody's thinking. I can hear when they're playing, when they're thinking about what they're doing. And conversely, I can hear when they're in complete flow state and they're not thinking about anything. And that's when you hear the best music. That's when you hear the best musicians. That's when you hear when you have a great experience as a listener, is when that musician is not thinking about anything related to harmony. And you will find that is a common thread if you ask your favorite musicians, who are, truly great at what they do. I would hazard a guess that most of them will say, yeah, well, I don't have to think about that, because it's something I hear, it's something I feel, and something I've listened to repeatedly and then played repeatedly. So it's, again, as natural as having this, albeit one-sided and one way, because it's a podcast, I'm sitting in a hotel room on my own. It needs to be as natural as this stream of words, this stream of consciousness talking about, in this case, harmony and being on the road and podcasting from the hotel. So that is my recommendation for that, as it always has been and always will be, is do it first and then learn what it is later. I think the jazz scam, right? That's when jazz became a commodity, when jazz became a commoditized, when it became a product, when people figured they could open schools to teach people how to play it, it sort of got destroyed. Or at least the most important part of how the tradition of improvised music in that genre is passed down. Of course, it's always been an oral tradition. It was always about jam sessions and hanging out and listening to records and doing the work, and learning the stuff from the generation of musicians that came before you, and then taking that and innovating it and doing your own thing with it. Now it's just a sort of generic blandness, because schools need a curriculum. They need a they need a thing they can charge $70,000 a year for. And that's not to say that some of these schools that like Berkeley and USC aren't worth $70,000 a year, but they're not fucking worth $70,000 a year to go learn jazz at. I think they're worth $70K for the community, for the network, for the facilities that some of these places have. Just unreal. I believe Berkeley is now the largest recording facility on earth since that new building, well, probably not that new anymore, but that Mass Ave building next to the 150 building. I wasn't even allowed. I couldn't even get a tour down there the last time I was there. How fucked is that? Couldn't even get in the front door. And I have a real close friend who worked like very high up in the hierarchy and couldn't get in. So that's very much an inside thing reserved for students only. That's the impression I get. So yeah, it could be worth going there to get ridiculous amounts of studio time that could cost you $1,000 a day elsewhere. You spend 70 days in the studio and make the most of your money, man. You've just you might have saved yourself some money after that, and financial aid is not so bad here and there. So I actually still think it's worth going to these schools, but don't go there based on the lie they're selling you about learning jazz, because that you can learn from records. You can go to a record store, spend about $1,000 on the best records and learn pretty much everything you're going to need to know to start your journey, and about 50 times more than they're actually going to teach you in a school like that about that specific thing. Got to be very clear about that. Because, yeah, as I said, I still think there's some great value going to these places. It's just they're not telling you what that is, I don't think. I don't see that right now. It would be I would have so much more respect for them if they were like super honest about it and were like, yeah, well, we have to have this curriculum here because mom and dad are not going to give little Timmy $70,000 to go to school if the curriculum just says, yeah, we're going to play music for 4 years. They want the kid to have a qualification. That's another bullshit thing to leave school with at the end of the day, unless you want to become a teacher and go straight back in the system. That's basically the only reason. It's a really weird kind of cycle of events that just like this perpetual cycle of what jazz school does for you. It's really bizarre, because of course it didn't exist 60, 70 years ago. It didn't. People were they just did the fucking work and they got great and they were motivated. And then when people figured out they could start making some money out of it, there was an initial wave of people making some money. And then like the students got qualified, that's such a joke, to go back to the school and teach there again. And teach yet another generation of people to have qualifications to teach. Yet another just on and on and on and on and on. It's kind of crazy. And I get it. If you're not into touring, but maybe that's bullshit. Maybe I don't get it. If you got into music, see, I think there are very few exceptional teachers. I mean, like people that will really, I can pick out like one that I had at Berkeley that was worth the price of admission alone. That was Hal Crook, because he fucked with you. He really made you think. He made you ask really big questions of yourself and of the music and of your students and of him. Like, he was a real powerhouse of a human being and a musical mind. And he had also done a whole bunch of shit as well. He played with Clark Terry. He'd made solo records. He had been a house writer on the TV show Chips, as far as I remember. He'd been like late night show bands. Like, he had actually done a bunch of stuff. It wasn't like he just got a degree in teaching and went back to Berkeley to teach. So there was a lot of respect there as well from his, actual musical prowess. So it takes, I think maybe George Garzone is a little bit like that. I know Charlie Bernacus was incredible like that. But we're talking about a very, very few people that make students ask questions on that level, So it's really, really kind of bizarre cycle of like churning out all these people. And it's kind of crazy. Like, there are, of course, great musicians. There are, of course, great young musicians coming along. As much as I'm not a massive fan of a lot of new music that's happened in the past maybe 10 years, especially in the lane of shit I like to listen to, there's no denying there are good young musicians out there, and they are sometimes coming from or have passed through, if only briefly, like myself and a bunch of other people passed through schools like Berkeley. But man, there's a lot of bullshit. And there's way more terrible music. Like, people who just, like, they don't hear things, the most basic things. Like, scarily so. Like, man, this podcast got fucking dark in a hurry, didn't it? But it's kind of crazy. It really is. Like, as I, and I think this is why I'm thinking about this as well. Maybe this would be a good closer, because it's also getting midnight here. I think a few a few really old friends of mine have come out to these shows, people who know me very well, people I've worked with a lot, great musicians, people whose opinions I respect. And they've all said, hey, this is a lot of music. Like this it's quite dense. This vital information thing is it's a very challenging gig. There are a lot of notes, a lot of unison lines, lots of different time signatures. Like good job, they've said, or whatever. Like they just dug the ensemble sound. They're like, wow, it's cool that this can sound this way with a trio. And my thought has been, like, every night so far when somebody's paid a compliment like that, it's like, yeah, and boy, am I glad I can read music, for instance, because this is a lot of music to learn. I have a little kid at home and a shitload of other responsibilities, and I didn't spend anywhere near as much time as I would have done, 10 years ago working on this music before I went on tour. I'd probably have had it all memorized, and there just wasn't the time now. And I played on a record. I even wrote some of the stuff, so it wasn't like it was unknown to me. So I had a bit of a head start, and it was kind of in my head a little bit. But I'm very thankful that I have some really solid basic skills. Like, I'm talking about the basic shit. I'm not trying to toot my own horn here about being a great musician. This is really about the fundamentals. It's about being able to play this complex music and successfully pull off these shows as a trio as a result of the basic stuff. The reactive stuff, the little details, the ear training stuff that's been developed over years and years and years of working on it. Not some, insane knowledge of chordal harmony or some crazy shit. No. It's not like I'm doing Stravinsky analysis on one side of my brain and playing Darn That Dream with the other. It's not that complex. But those basic skills are some of the things I see are really lacking in college age, 18 to 22, 23, whatever college age is these days, students. And I've been to give some clinics and master classes in the not too distant past and been kind of shocked at, like, whoa, how do you not hear that that's the 4 chord? I'm talking really like fundamental stuff that, like, even kids should really be able to hear and react to. But we're talking about someone who's paying a lot of money in some cases to go to a big school and is in a big program, and they're like, we departed from the 1 chord, we are now on the 4 chord, why don't you hear that? Like, the difference between a C major triad and a D major triad over a B flat pedal or something, like, maybe that's a little more advanced, but it's not that complex if you're 5 years out of college and have been a professional, whatever you play, guitar, keyboards, whatever it is. I hear that. Like, that's a regular thing that crops up. And there are fewer, let's say, I experience fewer and fewer younger musicians having that really high level of awareness on the most basic things. So I'm not sure what the answer is, though, because it would be really good to have an answer to that. I don't want to just sit here and complain about it, and I know there probably is a solution to that. That in the US, maybe that's a direct response or direct result of there being so little funding for great music education and awareness in younger kids, Like my father, Chelsea's dad, is a band director down in Long Beach, like, serious, like long Grammy-winning and long time, like, committed to the task of getting kids to listen to great music, I haven't spoken to him about, like, his program. Like, Chelsea's told me things, and there are different bands and different levels, and it's a really wide variety, I think, of kids at the high school level, maybe middle school as well. I'm not sure what Polly is, but I know he's dealing with a lot of kids and exposing them to a lot of great music. But that's one person in one school, and I think that is more the exception rather than the rule, from what I can tell. I should really ask Chelsea and her dad, actually, and get some solid feedback on it. That'd be really interesting if that is actually the answer. I remember being 10 or 11 years old and going to, like, I didn't go to school. For anyone who doesn't know, I was homeschooled, so I wasn't in a school with a music program, but there was the Merton Music Foundation. They're still around, actually, in South London, and it's like a little music school, and you can go and take very reasonably priced. I remember because we were piss poor at the time, so I know it was reasonably priced. Private lessons, 30-minute private lessons with teachers, and then there were a lot of ensembles: concert band, brass ensemble, guitar ensemble, jazz orchestra, orchestra, like all kinds of stuff, choir, and I remember that having a massive impact on me. From a really young age. We're talking like almost 35 years ago that I went to that, when I was like 10 years old or something, or 11 years, I can't remember, somewhere around there, pre-teens for sure. And, it was what it was, this little dinky music school with the resources, the limited resources they had, doing a lot of great stuff with a lot of great people, in charge, and a lot of great people directing the bands, great private teachers, and I learned a lot from that. So I think being around that from a young age definitely helped me. So maybe that is the answer. That's in England. I don't know what it's like here in the US, and maybe I hear a lot of there is no money for the arts in school. And I'm not saying they should be like under strict regimes, like, learning harmony this and all this theory and blah, blah, but just being exposed to stuff that excites someone. I think that's the the only job of a great teacher. The primary job is to inspire the student, and if you can't drill down to the core of what the student loves and then sort of inject more fuel into that for them to get past. It's like you just fuel the machine and the student will basically do all the work. Of course you can guide, and there are like little technical things. Oh, put your hand here and a finger there, or you might want to try this different approach or technical thing. You can help them in a physical sense, maybe more than anything, like directly, but just that feeding the information, like, why transcribe Charlie Parker if you like Periphery? You know what I mean? Maybe you'll get to Charlie Parker. Maybe you love Charlie Parker, and why transcribe Periphery? Maybe you'll get to Periphery one day. I know I did. Used to love Dizzy Gillespie, but I'll listen to some, Periphery anytime. You know what I mean? So, but it's like, I was, again, that's another thing I think I was very fortunate to have, were people around me that were like, these are the records that got us to the place we're at now. And that was the thing I liked listening to, because I was there listening to, I'm talking about Lawrence Cottle, my biggest mentor, and then other bass players in London like Jeff Gascoigne and Phil Mulford, who were hugely important for me. And the suggestions of what to listen to were maybe the most valuable part of it all. Of course, the hang and going to see the live music, actually getting out there and seeing what happens on stage, experiencing that was really important. We are talking like, early 90s. We're talking very pre-internet, not just pre-YouTube, but pre-internet, pre-everything. I didn't have a phone in my pocket. The phone was a thing in a room, in a house. It didn't go with you. So, yeah, that was massively important. And they weren't like, hey, you have to transcribe everything on Art Pepper Meets the Rhythm section because that's just the rules. No. Jeff Gascoigne told me, I really dig that record. And not only is there like great melodic lines in Art Pepper's playing, and he told me the cool story, I think, of like that was made shortly after Art Pepper came out of jail, and I was like, whoa, jazz musicians went to jail, holy shit. and like that just, it was inspiring. It sparked interest in, whoa, there's this whole other thing going on here. And he was telling me, hey, check out, you should check out Paul Chambers, man, he's a great bass player. And, even though I'd checked out Jeff Gascoigne, for instance, playing a lot of electric bass, more so than the upright, which he does play, of course, a lot. He said, man, I got to a lot of my stuff because of Paul Chambers, because of Ron Carter, and Lawrence Cottle telling me I got a lot of my stuff from Jaco Pastorius, and, have you checked out Pino Palladino? He happens to be Welsh. I'm Welsh. Like, they're just like little connections that were made very early on because of, and these weren't teachers for me. These were mentors. Like, I begged Lawrence to give me lessons, and he never would. He never told me a single thing about harmony ever. It wasn't until years and years later, 20 years later or something, I don't know, long time later, where I think we were having a curry or something in London, and we were talking about harmony, And I seem to remember asking him about the one voicing in his big band, and I thought it was like F7 over E7 or something, like some Stravinsky or some mess, I don't know, some like almost modern classical sounding thing. And he's like, oh yeah, that's what it was. And that was as close as he got to talking about harmony with me, that I asked him about all the time. And he's just like, no, you got to hear it, best, you've got to hear it. Best 5 words I think ever spoken to me was, no, you've got to hear it. And when you hear it, then you feel it. And I think when you feel it, it never goes away. Never goes away. We talked about this very briefly in the Marcus Reuter interview from a few weeks ago on the podcast, where my first experience of a natural 9 tension on a minor chord was G minor 9 from Alison Moyet's, I was about to say I doubt she did the arrangement, but I don't know. It's kind of a pop singer doing jazz stuff, so I have no idea actually. I'm going to give it a benefit now. Maybe she did do the arrangement. It is the arrangement of Alison Moyet singing This Old Devil Called Love. And I played that chord. When I heard it, I was like, what is that? And I was singing at the piano and I figured it out. And I was like, oh, the A natural and the B flat go together in the chord. And there's an F natural and there's a G in the bass. And so sometimes there's the 5th and sometimes there's the 11th. Holy shit. Thousands and thousands of times I just played that chord. I didn't even change key. I played it over and over again. And that feeling has never left me. And I have a similar feeling for every single combination of tensions on every chord. I think, I'm sure there are probably some I don't have as much familiarity with, especially when you start stacking. Okay, so as to scrub that, I have a similar experience on lots of relatively common tensions and harmonic situations, shall we say. And that just came from listening and doing and feeling. And that combination, it has never left me. It can never leave me unless I like bash my head on the sidewalk and get amnesia or something. That will be here in my musical palette for the rest of my life. And I think that's, rather than asking questions about why does G sharp work on A flat work on a G7 chord, just do it. Just play it over and over again. Play it 1,000 times. Record yourself. Have the discipline to do it. If you're truly curious about it, that's the other thing. Don't do it because I said to do it. Use some of the concepts that I suggest, sure. But make sure the content that you put into those concepts is something that inspires you. All right, that's it. My voice is going, gone. It's also 12:30 right on the nose, and I got to get some sleep. So I appreciate you guys hanging out and allowing me to test out the gear on the road. This is kind of awesome. And when my computer finishes updating, this will be up on YouTube. And hope you enjoy. Again, pre-sale for the new album is happening. It's below the video if you're watching on YouTube. It's linked in the show notes of the podcast. And I'll catch you all again on the next one. Got some great interviews coming up. I'm going to sit down with Steve Smith on this tour and have a nice long conversation about all the stuff. Maybe I'll tease a little bit of that. He's playing the drums. Yes, the drums on Don't Stop Believing, Open Arms, all the biggest Journey hits. He actually has that drum set from the early 80s on this tour. So I'm going to try and sit behind the drums and play it and get a little video of it because I think that would just be cool. I believe he's selling the kit at the end of this tour as well. He's sort of downsizing everything, and that kit is going to fans, big fans with some deep pockets, I would imagine. But yeah, we're going to sit down with Steve and talk about all that stuff and all the jazz and all of that. And other people as well. I've got some really, really cool interviews coming up. I'm going to actually sit down tomorrow with Jack Rohn from Noble, the Noble preamp DI that everyone knows, the Tube, the thing that took over the bass world in the preamp DI department. So yeah, some really fun conversations I foresee happening over the next couple of weeks, and I'll bring them to you on the podcast every week. That's it. See you guys next time. Bye.